I have spent most of my life learning one lesson about money that people only seem to remember when the system begins to shake. Ownership matters, not the appearance of ownership, not the paperwork that suggests ownership, not the platform statement, the account label, the promise, the convenience, or the story that somebody else is holding something on your behalf and that this should comfort you forever. Real ownership, that is where clarity begins. The trouble is that most people do not start thinking seriously about ownership until fear enters the room. Before that, they are willing to live inside abstractions. A bank balance feels like money. A brokerage statement feels like control. A paper claim on an asset feels close enough to the asset itself. The structure looks, then one rumor spreads, then another. Suddenly people start asking whether a bank can restrict withdrawals, whether regulators are lowering thresholds, whether gold can be rehypothecated endlessly, whether some state somehow lives outside the Federal Reserve System, whether the mint can source metal, whether the paper market still controls the price of silver, whether any of the claims surrounding modern finance still mean what people thought they meant. At that moment, you learn something very important. A rumor does not need to be true to reveal a truth. That is what I see in the atmosphere around money today. People are not merely hungry for facts. They are hungry for certainty. And they are hungry for certainty because they do not trust the structure that stands between them and their assets. That distinction matters. I do not like sloppy thinking. I do not like exaggeration. I do not like people panicking over claims that were never confirmed. If a law has not changed, it has not changed. If a rumor is false, it is false. If a supposed emergency rule or secret banking shift turns out to be internet fantasy, then a sensible person should say so. But he should not stop there, because the deeper issue is not the rumor itself. The deeper issue is why so many people are ready to believe it. And the answer, in my view, is simple. They no longer trust paper systems the way they once did. That is not a small development. That is a structural one. I have always believed that when confidence begins to crack, you should stop staring at the noise and start examining the architecture. People often waste time arguing over the rumor of the week when the real story is the underlying weakness that made the rumor plausible in the first place. Let me explain what I mean. Consider the constant fear around bank withdrawals. Every few months, some claim starts circulating that the government is about to slash the reporting threshold, flag every large cash movement, or turn ordinary withdrawals into presumptive criminal behavior. In the source document you provided, that question appears right near the front, and the answer is direct. There is no confirmed law, at least in the discussion captured there, that has officially lowered the long-standing $10,000 reporting framework for cash withdrawals and deposits. The piece pushes back clearly against the idea that ordinary people are suddenly forbidden from taking out larger sums from their own bank accounts. That is an important correction. A sensible person should not build his entire life around unverified legal hysteria. But there is something equally important beneath it. The fact that people are so ready to believe the rumor tells you they do not feel safe inside the system anymore. They suspect the banking structure does not merely hold their money. They suspect it monitors, discourages, delays, categorizes, and ultimately conditions their access to what they thought was theirs. Whether the current threshold changes tomorrow or 5 years from now is not the only issue. The atmosphere of distrust is already here. This is one of the great shifts in modern finance. People are discovering that there is a difference between access and ownership. If your wealth lives inside a system where every movement passes through an intermediary, then the practical meaning of possession becomes softer than you imagined. I am not saying the bank always acts against you. I am saying the structure was never built around your sovereignty. It was built around institutional control, compliance, balance sheet use, and administrative visibility. That is not conspiracy. That is design. And once you understand design, you stop being surprised by behavior. The same pattern appears in the way people talk about Basel III and gold. One of the specific claims addressed in your source file is the idea that some new Basel III rule has now prohibited banks from rehypothecating gold and silver. The text is quite firm in rejecting that rumor. It says no such outright ban exists in the way people online describe it. It explains that Basel III changed some treatment around liquidity and made certain forms of paper gold more expensive or less attractive to hold, but that is very different from a sweeping prohibition on rehypothecation across the banking world. Again, I think it is useful to reject false precision. If a thing has not happened, do not pretend it has. But also notice what the rumor reveals. The rumor only travels because people increasingly understand, at least instinctively, that there is a major difference between physical metal and paper claims on metal. They understand that an asset can be pledged, layered, reused, or represented in ways that create more claims than underlying substance. They may not use elegant technical language, but they understand the emotional core of the problem. They want to know whether what is supposed to be theirs is truly segregated, allocated, and untouchable, or whether it is just one more entry in a chain of paper promises. That concern is legitimate. I have always preferred to reduce confusion by returning to simple principles. If you hold an asset directly, you remove layers of interpretation. If you rely on paper representations, you introduce layers of dependence. The more complex the chain between you and what you own, the more faith you are required to place in people, rules, institutions, and accounting structures you do not control. That faith can be justified for a long time until it is not. This is why I say rumors can be false and still point toward the right battlefield. Basel III did not need to produce the exact internet myth for the larger lesson to remain valid. The larger lesson is that investors no longer trust paper gold, unallocated positions, and balance sheet games the way they once did. They want what they can verify. They want what cannot be multiply promised. They want what does not require a legal memo to explain whether they still own it after a crisis. That tells you something profound about the age we are entering. Trust is moving from representation back toward possession. Now look at another claim from the source text, the idea that North Dakota somehow stands outside the Federal Reserve System. The file rejects that too. It points out that while North Dakota has a unique state-owned bank, it still sits inside the broader Federal Reserve architecture, uses federal payment rails, and remains within the larger framework that governs the American financial system. The state's uniqueness is real in one sense, but it does not amount to separation from the central banking structure that matters because people are once again searching for an exit. They are asking whether there's any place left that still stands outside the machinery. Is there one state, one bank, one jurisdiction, one loophole, one structure, one hidden exception that keeps them beyond the reach of the Fed, beyond the reach of centralized influence, beyond the reach of paper systems and administrative control? Usually the answer is less romantic than they hope. No, there is not some secret island inside the system where modern monetary power does not reach. That realization, I think it should clarify them. The point is not to chase myths about being magically outside the system while continuing to live almost entirely inside it. The point is to understand how deeply the system reaches and then make rational decisions about which portion of your wealth you want exposed to that structure and which portion you want removed from it. That is a much more serious question. People who rely on myths often stay childish with money. People who study structure start becoming adult. Another theme running through the source file is the distinction between paper pricing and physical reality in precious metals, especially silver. The text makes a highly emotional but clear claim when the U. Mint suspends certain silver numismatic products amid volatility and sourcing strain. The event should not be read merely as a logistical inconvenience. It should be read as a signal that physical supply and physical demand are exerting pressure that paper markets cannot indefinitely suppress or explain away. Now, I am always careful around dramatic language. Markets love drama, and drama is often sold as evidence. But I think there is a useful core idea here. Paper markets can dominate price discovery for long periods. They can create the impression that price is whatever the most liquid derivative venue says it is. They can detach the experience of owning the real thing from the movement of the quoted thing. They can encourage people to believe that representation and substance are effectively interchangeable. For a while, that arrangement can hold, but if physical supply tightens, if holders become less willing to sell at quoted prices, if industrial demand rises, if retail and institutional demand rise at the same time, and if mints or dealers begin showing strain, then a very uncomfortable question emerges. What exactly is the paper price measuring? That question becomes especially sharp in silver, because silver occupies two worlds at once. It carries monetary history, but it is also an industrial input. It is consumed. It is used up. It does not simply sit in vaults across generations the way gold often does. The source text leans hard into that distinction, arguing that silver behaves like the fuse, while gold remains the anchor. The rhetoric is more dramatic than I would use, but the underlying distinction between a highly consumable strategic metal and a more permanent monetary reserve asset is not foolish. I have long believed that when a system becomes too dependent on symbols, pressure eventually returns through the physical world. The physical world does not care about elegant theory. It cares whether the metal is there. It cares whether the supplier can deliver. It cares whether demand can be met at the quoted price. It cares whether inventories are shrinking. It cares whether an ounce is available now, not whether a contract says it should be. This is why people become obsessed with physical ownership in periods of structural doubt. It is not because everybody has suddenly become a metallurgist. It is because direct possession eliminates interpretive distance. If you hold the metal, there is no debate about whether the metal exists. There may still be debate about price. There may still be debate about timing. There may still be debate about whether silver outruns gold, whether gold anchors silver, whether industrial demand changes faster than investment demand, whether futures markets are overstating or understating reality. But one debate disappears completely. Do you actually have the asset? That debate matters more than people admit. I think one reason gold has endured for so long is precisely because it answers that question with unusual finality. Gold is not somebody else's liability. It does not rely on another party's future performance in order to remain what it is. It does not need a government promise to be itself. It does not expire. It does not corrode. It is not burned for energy, dissolved by utility, or consumed in ordinary industrial scale the way silver can be. It simply remains. That permanence gives it a peculiar monetary dignity. Silver is different. Silver is more volatile, more speculative in periods of excitement, and more vulnerable to the violent swings that come when industrial demand and monetary fear collide. Yet silver's very messiness is part of why people are drawn to it in transition periods. It sits closer to the fault line. It can reflect stress earlier. It can behave more like a pressure indicator. That does not make it safer than gold. It makes it more explosive. A sensible person should know the difference. If gold is the anchor, then silver is the amplifier. If gold is preservation, silver is often transition. If gold is monetary memory, silver is monetary agitation. And in times like these, people want both memory and agitation. They want the enduring reserve and the instrument that may react violently if confidence deteriorates fast enough. That is why the public conversation around metals becomes so intense whenever trust in institutions weakens. But I do not think the ultimate lesson is to chase the most exciting rumor about banks, mints, Basel rules, cash restrictions, or hidden escape routes. I think the lesson is to become very clear about where your wealth actually lives. That question is more important than almost anything else in finance. Where does your wealth live? Does it live entirely inside digital claims, inside institutions that can delay, interpret, report, freeze, redirect, or administratively burden your access? Does it live entirely in assets whose quoted value depends on paper markets functioning smoothly? Does it live in vehicles whose relationship to underlying substance becomes harder to parse precisely when you most care about clarity? Or does some meaningful portion of it live in forms you can verify directly? That is not a matter of paranoia. That is a matter of architecture. The strongest financial structures are not necessarily the most efficient in tranquil times. Often they are the ones that remain intelligible in disorder. People underestimate the value of intelligibility. A complicated plan can look brilliant in calm weather. Then stress arrives, and suddenly nobody is sure what is owned, who controls access, which claims are senior, which obligations can be delayed, and whether the visible balance corresponds to recoverable reality. That is when simple things become powerful. Cash in hand is simple. Physical gold is simple. Physical silver is simple. A direct title to something real is simple. Simplicity is underrated because people confuse it with crudeness. I do not. I confuse it with resilience. Now, I am not arguing that a sensible person should put every dollar into coins and bars and call it a day. That would be theater of a different kind. Businesses still create value. Productive assets still matter. Equities still matter. Skill still matters. Income still matters. Diversification matters. What I am saying is narrower and more important. You should know the difference between assets that rely on the system and assets that stand somewhat apart from it. You should know the difference between exposure and possession. You should know the difference between a number on a screen and something you can verify with your own hands. And you should not wait for the loudest rumor to force that education on you. One of the patterns that appears whenever financial trust begins eroding is that people overreact at the tactical level and underreact at the structural level. They become fascinated by whether the threshold is changing next Tuesday, whether the mint stopped one category of product, whether one obscure banking term means total collapse, whether a special rule passed somewhere in Basel. Those questions may matter at the edges, but they distract from the larger issue. The larger issue is whether the public is beginning to understand that convenience came with dependency. That is the true story here. Modern finance made people feel frictionless, and in doing so, it trained them to overlook counterparty exposure, administrative power, paper abstraction, and the fragility of trust. Now that trust is weakening, all of those hidden conditions are surfacing. The rumors are symptoms. The structure is the disease. A mature investor should respond accordingly. He should not become gullible. He should not become hysterical. He should not spread nonsense because nonsense feels good. But neither should he retreat into comfortable denial and pretend that every institutional layer deserves the same confidence it received. 15 years ago, confidence should be earned. And in finance, the cleanest form of earned confidence often begins with direct ownership. That is why, if you forced me to reduce this entire subject to one sentence, I would not say trust every rumor. I would not say ignore every rumor. I would say this. Use every rumor as an opportunity to ask whether what you think you own is truly yours. That question can make you very uncomfortable. It can also make you much stronger, because once you begin asking it honestly, a lot of modern finance starts to sort itself into two piles. The first pile contains claims, promises, representations, permissions, and conveniences. The second contains things that remain what they are, even when confidence falls. I know which pile I would rather be leaning toward when the age becomes uncertain, and that is why, even while rejecting false stories, I keep returning to the same conclusion. The world may argue endlessly over regulations, thresholds, central banking myths, and the daily drama of metals markets. Fine, let them argue. My interest is simpler. I want to know what is real. I want to know what I own. I want to know what remains outside the softening power of paper claims. That instinct has served investors well for a very long time, and I suspect it will serve them well again.